Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where are we going to go to first? I just want to say thank you very much to Baldfella on Twitter. Just you've completed life. Like I've got to boss level. I've finished the game. I'm packing it in. I'm shipping off to Game Exchange, and I can die happy now because someone's made a GIF of me doing something. So good job, good job. Anyway, that's just nonsense. Moving on. No, thank you, Paul. Really appreciate that. The classic that we keep hearing is that, oh my goodness, Ukraine are debased themselves, the US have debased themselves in asking for and giving cluster munitions, as if Russia haven't been using them already. I've shown you video evidence of them using it on civilians in Kharkiv. I mean, and here, did anyone say Russia has not yet deployed cluster munitions? This is an X-59 Mk2 missile, Mark II missile with a cluster warhead, reportedly in the Zaporizhia direction. Well, there you go. Anyway, moving swiftly on. I just wanted to dip into the news from this morning. We have, this is from Odesa. What does it say? Russian forces targeted Odessa Oblast with Iranian major drones and missiles at 1 a.m. local time. Suspleen Odessa reported on Telegram. The city was repeatedly attacked by Caliber cruise missiles, KH-22 missiles, and Shahid drones. And it appears anti-ship missiles, cruise missiles. So these are missiles that are, I think, harder to shoot down with their defenses and gives the Russians a much greater chance of succeeding in their attempt at carrying out war crime, which is basically smacking up a city like this with civilians in, hitting grain depots with food destined for the rest of the world. And ironically, as many people have pointed out, food for its kind of allies in a sense, Russia, or at least people who are slightly more friendly towards Russia than the norm. So India and certain nations in Africa looking to get that grain. Well, Russia, I hope those countries realize that Russia has done their very best to stop that from happening. It's pretty terrible what has taken place in Odessa. It's been really, really hit badly. On the other hand, Ukrainians have hit Crimea. As I mentioned, there was a training ground, military training ground, that was really heavily hit, and munitions there apparently are still going off. These are some images from Reuters showing that things are not looking good there still. But that's a couple of hours ago, so I don't know whether that's still the case, but you get the point. Now, there's a significant hit on the Crimean Peninsula. In fact, there was a number of hits in Crimea. So I want to go next to this. This is so super important. And this is an easy win for Russia, really. It's really desperately easy and cheap to proliferate false information. I've talked to you before about how fake news travels 5 times faster on Facebook and on the internet than truth. And what happens is the more you see something, the more credible it becomes. Truth is illusion, or illusion is truth effect, and mere exposure effect. So the mere exposure effect is, the more you see something, the more credible it becomes, and that includes people as well. So if there are people who would otherwise have been kind of rejected. You can see this with politics. People who are really on a fringe in politics, if they're on TV the whole time, then they become more acceptable and more normalized, and it's good for them. It's the idea that any publicity is good publicity. We had this in the UK, and I know there are plenty of my audience who were pro Brexit. But one of the complaints during the Brexit debates, and this is really interesting, was that a chap called Nigel Farage, who was in charge of the Leave campaign, who was not an elected MP, not an elected MP. He appeared on Question Time, which is the BBC political flagship programme, and he appeared, 33 times. And the Green MP, Caroline Lucas, who is really erudite, really good, Brighton MP, who is elected and has been elected a number of times, and was at the time leader of the Green Party, appeared in that same time period once, right? And it's this idea that uh, the more someone is on TV, the more normalized that they become, and thus the more it's kind of feeds into a snowball, and they become more and more popular. And in that case, his views proliferated widely, and they had success at the polls. But there's a point that the more you are on TV, like this is how advertising works, the more successful or more widespread your views, message, uh, products are. Um, Here we have a viral tweet by Twitter Blue subscribed conspiracy theorist. So this is someone who can, because of Twitter Blue, they can announce that even more. Like their tweets get the algorithm supports their tweets and throws it out to a wider audience like a megaphone, claiming this is a picture of Ukrainian President Zelensky's home. It's got 11,000 retweets, 25,000 likes, and 1.3 million views. And the problem is, once those things are out there, you can't reel them back in. Like they're out there and they're still spreading around with that misinformation, right? And this is misinformation. The image shows a villa in Beausoleil in France, listed on real estate websites. So this is a really easy thing for Russia to do, which is get some really rich mansion from anywhere, doesn't really matter, and whack it on Twitter and say that this is Zelensky's home. The US just announced another $1.3 billion aid package to Ukraine. Reminder, here's a picture of Zelensky's home. Lol. Except it's not. That's not a picture of Zelensky's home. Here's the reality. It's for 4.9 million euros on a real estate website. But that's out there now, and you can't read it in from people's heads. It's in people's heads, and it's feeding their biases. And fake news travels 5 times quicker than truth. And so, even if you put a corrective of that out there, and Twitter puts something below, like this is an incorrect claim or something like that you sometimes see, it's not going to undo the damage that does. And things like this are easy wins for the Russians, and as I say, are cheap, and will feed into a narrative and a kind of feed into the Russian talking points that they would like people to hear. It really, really frustrates me. Things like this, just I have a real issue with lies and people not having an accurate representation of reality. That's kind of, I suppose, why I do what I do. It really gets my goat, that. And I say to my kids, like, if they ever lie to me, like, the one thing that annoys me, guys, is don't lie to me. It's just one little lie and it opens up to more and more. Just it's really important to me. Stuff like this, I guess, could be why it just really irritates me. To have a big thing about lying and truth and whatnot. Uh, Ukraine restored. I love this. Restored the Irpin embankment in Kyiv Oblast, damaged during the Russian occupation. The restoration works included the renovation of lawn watering nozzles, street lights, and tiles, said the mayor of Irpin, Alexander Markushin, a mayor of Irpin. This is my hope for Ukraine after this is all over. Is that the places that are destroyed? You look at someone like Mariinka, and you say, right, we can start again now. Start again. Make this a beautiful place, a sustainable place, an efficient place, just a lovely place to live, that makes sense, rather than trying to rebuild somewhere, or rather than just organic cities that get develop over time. And that's lovely, and you get the historical nature of those places, but they often aren't the most efficient places, or they're not easy to plan things from a greater strategic point of view, because actually you've got to work with what you've already got. You can just knock Mariinka down fully, because it is already knocked down, and say, right, let's make this an awesome place. And here, yes, this is a PR video and whatnot, but this is great, fantastic. I'm not sure what those orange things there are, but I don't know whether they'll be have roofs placed on and things happen with them. I don't know. Who knows? But this looks pretty wonderful. Big fan of that. Now, what I absolutely hate if Russia just nails that again with a cruise missile. But yeah, good stuff. And I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of this going forward in Ukraine, given that there are so many places that need entirely redeveloping. But it's amazing that they've done this during wartime and as quickly as they have. Fantastic. Right, I want to just deal with a couple of comments, one that will lead on to a larger analysis. This one was in response to the Ukrainians picking out that flag, running it across the street and crawling up the building and putting it back in the building, and talking about how that little act sort of spoke volumes. This is from Milmucker Tom, who has become a member. Really appreciate that. Uh, he interviewed me, as I said yesterday, 10 years ago on his own YouTube channel about whether or not we have free will. Anyway, he says here, great illustration of the power of flags. As you know, flags are my passion, and it really helps Ukraine that their flag is so good. It's made me think. I was like, is it? I guess it is actually. It's simple, bold, and symbolic. It's meant to represent the clear blue sky above a field of wheat. So just to let you know, that is what it represents. We recently had the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool, and the city authorities painted a bunch of stuff blue and yellow. A very cheap gesture, but a very powerful one. Parts of the city were instantly recognisable as being in support of Ukraine. Although Russia's flag is simple, it's just a recycled Dutch flag with the order of the colours altered. Because of this, it commits a cardinal sin of flag design. One of the edges is completely white. This means that when it's put on a white background, the top stripe disappears, which makes it look very off indeed. There was an example of this when you looked at a booklet of propaganda illustrating the differences between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Yeah, he's right there. Now, it is a really effective flag, and it's effective because we all know that flag. It's an easy flag, and those colours, when we see them around, we know exactly that it refers to Ukraine. So the turquoise and that golden yellow are quite, it's just a little bit different from many other flag colours. And they're, as I say, instantly recognisable. It does a really good job, basically, of being a national flag. It's just really evocative whenever we see that flag. And I think it's the colours as well. There's something positive about that. I mean, who knew I'd ever be speaking about like the effects of colour? But there's something positive about those colours. They are uplifting colours. The say the Russian flag or the Union flag of Great Britain, you know, you've got that red, white, and blue, and those are really strong colours, aren't they? Uh, but I wouldn't say they're uplifting, positive, happy colours. Whereas that kind of blue and yellow, I think is that they are happy colours. It sounds a weird thing, but I think there's a general positivity you get in seeing that flag and those colours are so often, you know, thrown about in terms of lighting, face paints, streamers, all sorts of stuff that we've seen in support of Ukraine in different places. Those colours are instantly recognizable now, and that is, you know, this is a marketeer's dream, right? I think that is significant in helping Ukraine in that very small way. It just helps Ukraine's kind of PR campaign with the rest of the world. If they had a more complex flag, or a flag that was just, I don't know, darker colors or something like that, I just think I don't think that would have been as beneficial to Ukraine as this flag. So I love it when people say stuff that make me go, hang on, I think I need to think about that. Yeah, god damn, yeah, that's good. Yeah, really, really like that comment. Thanks, Tom. Right, we're going to go on to Robert Ezagalis again. So many comments, and so often really, really insightful. Here he says, and this is going to go on to a larger analysis. Hindustan Times, so they are it's a large media outlet that appears to often spout Russian narratives, is now indicating that the Russian MOD has changed its strategy. They parrot what they are told by the Russians. The details that that media source is giving, consistent with some information from other sources, is that the Russian MOD may be headed toward a far more all-in strategy that they were utilizing previously. That means deploying and using more of the most valuable assets and the Russian MOD that the Russian MOD is believed to have. So we've heard today that perhaps they're using T-14 Armatas uh, on the front line, or at least in support somewhere. So they only have sort of 20 of those in broadly prototype form. Um, so rather than holding back the better items and keeping some of their best items either very scarce or absent from the Ukrainian battlefield, of course, that would also imply more of the core permanent military who know how to use those assets have to be deployed to Ukraine. Interesting. They will not like that, but that is a current trend. In addition to even more Mobics and contract soldiers and even more use of cannon fodder. However, we can most probably expect more support from the additional assets that the Russians are reportedly deploying. It means that the Russians are looking to achieve larger, faster results on the battlefield. They may be intent on trying to overwhelm Ukraine capabilities. Sometimes that type of move is rather desperate as a response to a worsening situation, taking bigger risks bigger and more costly losses, and it will be up to Ukraine to assure that Russia suffers those asset losses. On the other hand, it continues to increase the pressure on Ukrainian suppliers, Ukraine suppliers of Ukraine, its supportive allies, to be more provident and more quickly provident. We have long said that what has been provided thus far is significantly short of adequate. Right, just before we go on, I really want to talk to some of that because this is really interesting. And I was thinking about this over the last few days anyway, which is that Russia actually have everything to lose kind of just now. They're in a position whereby they have to commit everything. There is no point in them holding anything back. This is a situation where they are on the edge of failing, the Russians, and I don't think they can win anyway. So they might as well go all in. I say they've got nothing to lose. They've got everything to lose. Everything's on the line. So they have to, I would suggest, just throw the kitchen sink at this. Now, there are certain red lines they're unable to cross that they probably would cross if there were no other agents involved across the world. If it was just them and Ukraine, they would just send in the nukes, right? But that's not going to happen. So what can they do? Well, they're sanctioned. They can't get equipment and support from nations that they would like, such as China. They would love weapons and stuff from China. China are unwilling to support them in that way. Iran are giving them things, but then they're starting to have arguments with Iran concerning the Middle East and those islands in the Middle East that UAE and Iran are arguing about. You've got North Korea, who they're involved in their own issues with South Korea, but they might be giving them some ammunition. But essentially, they're on their own. They are throwing now T-14s in because they can't produce new equipment en masse. There was talk, I'm going to show it tomorrow, there's a picture of a brand new T90, but I don't know how many T90s that they are able to make. So yeah, I would completely agree that there is this situation where they are going to be throwing everything at this war, and I think that might also partially explain some of the activities along the front line at the moment, which is right. Let's just attack everywhere, do everything we can, even if it's going to exhaust us. We've got to. We've just got to throw everything at this, and I wonder whether there is an element of that in the counterattacks that we are seeing. So anyway, to continue with what Robert is saying here, uh, that Ukraine does not have enough heavy guns, enough of the right munitions, enough rocketry platforms, and so forth. They do not have them, not for that length and complexity of line of contact, zigzagging its snaky way across Ukraine. In effective terms, it could easily be more than 1,000 kilometers if we count all the zigs and zags, incursions and excursions along the typically far too simplified map. Ukraine density as to assets necessary for control of the situation as a whole is far too porous and sparse. The distances are too large for rapid enough responses to some Russian actions. A too scattered approach and too few assets will not work very well, if at all. The Russians are probably counting on that and still believe that they can take advantage of the situation. While this is unlikely to be at its peak of Russian activity during the hot summer period, regardless of how much pushing and shoving goes on, there is most probably going to be even more major effects given autumn when the weather is cooler and less exhausting to both men and some of the equipment. And I guess there's a lot to be said about that, which is that this is a long line and it is porous. And while the Ukrainian forces are going to be somewhat more consistently ordered in some of these places where they're attacking at the moment, um, when you go up to places like northern Kharkiv, up here by Kupiansk, you can imagine they're not going to be as as well set out as they are elsewhere in terms of equipment and personnel. There are plenty of opportunities for the Russians to punch holes in the Ukrainian defenses. The Ukrainians just don't have enough troops and equipment to adequately defend this whole line. Now, the Russians missed their opportunities, possibly because they were so intent on Bakhmut. And because they were so intent on Bakhmut, they piled everything into there. And I really do think Bakhmut was a massive success for the Ukrainians. And that may sound controversial to some, and certainly to pro-Kremlin shills. But actually, I really do. The more I think about it, the more I believe it ruined the Russian offensive. So the Russians had sort of 6 months worth of potential offensives, and they wasted that opportunity. There were a number of places they could have attacked and caused the Ukrainians some issues, but they seemed to just concentrate so heavily on Bakhmut that the Ukrainians were like, okay, let's have that here then. We know where this is going to take place. We are fixing your troops here so that they are nowhere else. And this is going to be expensive for you in terms of ratio of troops needed, especially since you don't seem to be committing too much mechanized equipment. So it's going to be heavily troop led, and it's going to be a high ratio of attackers to defenders, but also a high ratio of your losses to our losses. So let's do that. We know it's going to be here. We can control it to some extent. Like, if we don't know where you're going to attack and you're attacking up there and down there, a bit like now, right? That's a bit like, this is kind of like what Russia should have done, which is launch a big attack up in Kupiansk, launch a counterattack here, do a bit of that, or an attack here, an attack there, and maybe try a little bit more cleverly in the Bakhmut area. I don't know. That would have been far more successful than putting all your eggs, effectively most of your eggs, in the Bakhmut basket. And if it's not in that basket, it's in the Avdiivka basket, which is pretty much the same thing. And if it's not in that basket, it's in Vuhledar, where they just wasted literally hundreds of pieces of equipment on minefield after minefield. And so I think there was a massive failure for the Russian offensive that has led uh, to a complete lack of accomplishment there. And the Ukrainians were able to hold those Russian offensive lines in place with existing troops whilst training up their counteroffensive troops. And now we've got to this situation of the counteroffensive. The Russians have actually done a really good job of setting up all these defenses. I know some people were a bit, even people like Thomas Tyner were like, oh, these would be easy, if you've got the right equipment. And he was presenting a case of how to overcome these these breach these defenses. And that's in a perfect world if you've got, maybe you've got air support, which you don't, and maybe if the minefields weren't so dense and pretty much bloody everywhere, then you can do that. But this is the real world. You're getting hammered whilst you're trying to negotiate these lines and breach these obstacles with very relatively few pieces of breaching equipment that are going to be at the vanguard and getting hammered by Russian artillery, ATGMs, and attack helicopters. So it's really, really difficult. I think the Russians have done a good job in setting up these defenses exactly where they predicted the Ukrainians would want to attack. And now the Ukrainians are left with a choice. I don't know. So it's gone a little bit quieter. We aren't seeing as much activity in some of these places that we might have expected. And I wonder whether the Ukrainians are thinking, right, we need a bit of a plan B here. And I was thinking, what would that be? Would they concentrate on other areas, or would they still try and achieve this land bridge? It has to be. I don't want to jump ahead too much because there's still the opportunity that actually, because the Russians are throwing everything at this, that they will soon become exhausted and then capitulate, or holes will turn up, morale, uh, so on and so forth. All these variables might come into play, and there could be a break through the line somewhere. But if that is not forthcoming, I was wondering whether the Ukrainians might have a sort of plan B that I don't know. It could look something like it's going to be about avoiding masses and masses of minefields, and I think you just have all of these sort of minefields and trenches that are so well uh, dug in and arranged and organized in that area that maybe you just go somewhere else, right? Which is I don't know, possibly somewhere like this, and then down there and get behind. And if you can get behind that layer of the defenses, then hey, you can still come down to Mariupol and you can split off around there. And I don't know whether there is an alternative that allows you to bypass all of these all of these defenses, and whether that's in the southern Donetsk as it comes from north to south front line around here, whether we've seen the Ukrainians go a little bit quiet because something else is on the cards. And then, of course, you have options over perhaps from Kherson. And it could be that this is suddenly a little bit more attractive. But then, of course, the Russians still have defenses and minefields. Well, I don't know about the minefields so much, but certainly you've got built uh, trenches built all along the Dnieper, particularly down in this southern area on the way to Crimea, because the Russians know it's all about Crimea, right? So you either got to come from there or you've got to come from here, right? Those are the only two places you're getting to Crimea, and flooding the the river was essentially a pretty good idea. It's terrible, heinous, right? But tactically, operationally, pretty good idea to kind of stop this uh, movement of the Ukrainians. But if they can somehow get large amounts of equipment across quickly, pontoon ferries, pontoon bridges, I don't know if that's remotely doable, really, or take somewhere like the Kimburn Peninsula. If you can knock out every bit of Russian artillery there, then maybe advance along there. But then you're still at a pinch point. This area of the peninsula that means it might be shooting fish in a barrel. I don't know. It's going to be about hemming in the Russians in Crimea, not necessarily entering it, but if you are at Crimea's doors, then that's really what you want. Whether you can get round behind coming down from Donetsk, I don't know. Let me know what you think, or do you think that the Ukrainians should keep doing what they're doing and waiting for that moment that the Russians suddenly are devoid of adequate artillery support, close air support, and the minefields can be somewhat more easily breached because they don't have the hassle of being hammered by artillery consistently. But yeah, thank you for Robert Ezagalis to sort of talk about this. I do think that the Russians have thrown everything, or are throwing everything, at the Ukrainians right now, and it'll be interesting to see if they go for lots of small attacks along something like the Luhansk Kharkiv axis, or whether they go for just a couple of larger attacks that really make the Ukrainians adapt their plans or change their plans to try and deal with what the Russians are throwing at them. As ever, let me know what you think. Anyway, that's me done for today. Hopefully that was of some interest for you. Thank you so much for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.